Okay, the time is 5 o'clock. I will go ahead and call this special workshop meeting to order. We will begin with the pledge of allegiance. Please stand with me for that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you everybody for coming this evening. The primary purpose of this evening's meeting is a workshop meeting for the commission to discuss with stakeholders the idea of selling the railroad or keeping the railroad as port property. And so what we're going to be doing is having some discussions with the stakeholders that have joined us tonight. This meeting is not going to be open to public comment. It's just a workshop for us. We're not going to be making any decisions tonight. It is simply information gathering so that we can weigh out the pros and the cons of selling the railroad versus keeping the railroad, and to identify any information that we don't currently have or that we would like to gather in order to make such a decision. The second objective will be to give Jenny a clear directive of any information that we still need so that she can put together a report for us and present it to us at the next special meeting that will be open to the public about this, so that we can identify that information and address it with the public. So tonight we won't be hearing public comment. It'll just be comment between the commission and the stakeholders that we have invited tonight, so that we can gather the information that we need to make a decision. So with that, I would like Jenny to please introduce the stakeholders for us.
Okay, so we have, starting with Ryan Paulson over here by the door. He's with the city of Dayton. They have utility. Chris, Chris, you have a chair in here. You're so disruptive.
Thank you.
Good job, Chris. Way to make a quiet entrance.
Yeah, here's your sign. Thank you. At least that's all it says.
Anyway,
As Jenny stated, I'm Ryan Paulson. I'm the Public Works Director for the city. We currently have a wastewater project that will have conveyance down to a property approximately 3 miles to the west. With a current agreement in the works, if you will, it's gonna cost the city minimal dollars, in my mind, if it stays in its current state. It could be potentially financially detrimental if it was privatized, or not even possible. They may deny our conveyance for a right of way. That's, the city has really no stance one way or the other than that potential financial detriment. I can't say that it will be detrimental financially, but it has much more potential if it's private. It's not the only conveyance, but as of right now, it is by far the most cost-effective route. So I would say the city of Dayton and surviving really needs it, because we are being not completely forced yet, but we are being given directive from EPA that we have to upgrade our wastewater facility. And this is the ground that we have, we're working to obtain, and we are months from acquiring that land. And we are also probably weeks from being able to have this agreement in place, both with the port and with the city council approval. So, you guys have any questions? Sorry.
Well, Ryan has another meeting at 5:30, so that's why he's on it right now. Yeah, that's okay. No, it's okay. I was just gonna introduce people, but it's okay. So I'm glad you spoke.
That's perfect. That's the information that once we put it all together, right? That's one piece.
And I am very sorry that I'm leaving in 10 minutes, but I'm more than happy to come talk to you at any other point in time. Unfortunately, I'm on the school board, so I gotta go to the school board. So,
Thank you for serving on the school board. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and you don't all have to speak when I introduce you, but we have Paul DeDelius. He is owner of Columbia Rail, operator of the rail line right now. We have Chris Shires. He is with Seneca Foods, and they use the rail line to ship product. We have David McKinley, who is with the Columbia County Grain Growers Association. The farmers in the area have a shipping interest. This is Chris Peha. He is with Northwest Grain Growers. Also, they do use the line to ship grain out of Prescott. Deb is here from the city, so when Ryan leaves, in case we need a city representative. And then online, we have Keith Bruno from RL Banks and Associates and Gary Engelmeyer from Gary Engelmeyer and Associates. And those were two of the consultants that helped develop the rail appraisal. And so I just asked them to come in case we have questions.
Okay.
So, okay.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you, Jenny. So since Ryan has to leave here in a couple minutes, if anybody has any questions that you would like to ask of him, that would be probably the best time, because in a couple minutes you won't be able to get him.
Ryan, do you have other right of ways through the railway now? Water lines?
Oh, yes, yes,
Okay.
sorry, we have current right of ways that go underneath the rail, yes.
Okay.
All through town, pretty
Yeah,
much.
All
Yeah.
over,
Okay.
water lines, sewer lines, our streets,
Okay.
so.
So if a conveyance was, if you were coming to us for a conveyance to run that on the port property, and we granted that to you, and you had an easement there to run your line and whatnot, and we sold the line, wouldn't that transfer to the new ownership?
Ultimately, yes, that's why we're trying to have the proper verbiage, that it would
Mhm.
stay an easement in perpetuity.
Right.
So, yeah, if this transpired after the fact, as long as we have the verbiage that allows us to still access it, not just have an easement, but still maintain it,
Right,
because I'm not gonna lie,
of course.
if the rail doesn't let us maintain it and we have a problem, they're gonna lose their rail.
Right.
So, but yeah, that is true.
I was gonna, what about, I guess one other thought is the cost of placing, of doing other work in the right of way. So right now, we kind of, Paul and his, rail management company, I give little bits of pressure to make sure the prices are kept down for the costs of people to enter the right of way, and I do my best so that they still make money, but it doesn't hurt the community too much. So that's a consideration.
Future expansion of our city, urban growth areas out west. What other conveyance do you have to get other water and sewer out that direction?
We would have to go through private property easements and obtain those. There's no guarantee there. There's a couple of words that I don't like to say out loud. That is, there's potential. There's also the potential for the WashDOT right away. Sorry, if anybody's affiliated with WashDOT, working with them is a nightmare. I'm sorry. But the permitting process is very, very tedious. We're doing it currently on South 4th Street, and we've been working on it for 5 months just to get a contract, so.
Thank you, Ryan.
And then one more consideration just for the port side is that we have placed fiber in the railroad right of way.
Right.
So we would have to remember that we have a utility in there
Yes.
that we would need access to and
Maintenance.
and hope not have to pay to have it in that right of way.
And conceptually, we have worked with that fiber placement. Not to interject, sorry, but
It's okay.
we have worked with that fiber placement to try and stay away from it. Dealing with fibers, not also cheap either, so we're trying to stay on the opposite side of it. So we've worked with that in our conceptual layout of that. That helps.
Any other questions for Ryan right now? All right, Paul DeDelius, few years ago, you had come to the port of interest in purchasing the rail line from us. And it's been quite a process to get to the point that we're at right now with reviewing our comp plan and appraisal and one appraisal falling through and getting a new appraiser and everything. I appreciate you sticking with us through this entire process to get to where we are right now. I guess the question that I have for you, are you knowing everything you know now and everything we've been through and where we're at? Is that something that you are still interested in?
Yes.
Okay. So if you would please just tell us a little bit about what I know we've been over it a couple times before, but just briefly just remind us of what your goals and your aspirations are for the line and you know, I know there's been some current concern mentioned in previous meetings from the public that if it was to put into the private ownership, that there's no, you know, guarantee that it's going to stick around, that you could just rip it out and scrap the rails. And so I know that concern has been floating around the voice of the community. So if you could just, you know, run us through what you want to do and what your goals are with the rail line and how you would like to proceed with it if this was something that we were to decide in favor of.
Sure. So, started my railroad company in 2006 in Walla Walla County. And at this point, we've grown to about 250 miles of line that we've acquired either by lease or by ownership around the state of Washington. And 100 of those miles we've actually placed back into service from having trees growing through them or, you know, not being operated for years. And that's involved a certain number of millions of our own freight dollar, as well as some state grants, including on this line. And so it's an expensive and you know, relatively complex business running a short line railroad, but it's also rewarding and interesting, and get to meet a lot of cool people around different industries and communities. So we've been involved in on this line since I think 2016, maybe 2015 conversations many years in advance of 2016, but leasing it since 2016. And then we actually took over what had been a different railroad company, Watco. They had leased the franchises in Walla Walla, and we took those over in 2019 and hired Stewart maybe a year later. And so we've got this growing team around the state. We're heavily headquartered in Walla Walla. We also have offices in Richland and over near Tumwater on the west side. And then I live up in Lewiston. So, you know, in terms of what we want to achieve with owning this line, we've operated it and kind of bootstrapped improvements to it, restored the service, I think in 17 from having been closed in 2014. And so about the last thing we'd want to do with it would be to shutter it or liquidate it. That's not our history around the state. If I were, you know, some years from now to kick it and there was new management or something like this, those things are easy enough to covenant or manage in terms of how the sale is structured, as far as salvage of the track, discontinuance of operation, and we've certainly appreciated Seneca's business, Northwest Grain Growers business, and there's a kind of technical and challenging process to eliminate service, active service, that's managed federally. And obviously Seneca and Northwest Grain wouldn't react positively to losing service. So we're a freight builder, we're a track builder, and so our interest is in growing it. And there's other factors too, that we would be advantaged in growing this line and growing our business around the state generally through ownership versus lease. There's credibility there, there's longevity there, there's ease of investment, those kind of factors, as well as even having an asset you can borrow against. So those are just to name a few.
And that kind of tips on the why, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a lease and your lease is decent, it's fair,
right?
right?
Mhm.
And if you have a lease and it's fair, I would think, and I'm not in the rail business, but any business, I'm like, oh, now I gotta purchase this for this amount of money, and then I'm dumping money into it
Mhm.
with the limited amount of traffic that's on it right now.
Right,
So some of the things you said, credibility or longevity, right? The why buy it rather than continue to lease it and operate it and still have the ability to do what you need to do. So that's my thought. It's like, that's what I'm thinking is why buy it rather than lease it?
Mhm.
And you caught on a couple of things.
Right.
There. So, any more on that? Like, yeah, just the why would we?
Simplicity, I mean, it's one less layer of, kind of approval or, approval's maybe not the right word, one less layer of consultation. We can just do things. I mean, we have 80 miles that we own on the west side of Washington State. And we sort of don't have anyone we report to besides the safety regulators and the taxing authorities. So it's simple. So, I mean, that's an ease of doing business essentially.
Okay.
And I think I mentioned it, but I'll mention it again, just the ease of making investments. When we have, say, a 3-year lease and we're sticking a tie in under the rail, I mean, we're pulling ties. I mean, some of them that have little markers that have been put on them from 1926 or something like that. I mean, that's a long asset, right?
Mhm.
And arguably some of those ties from the 1920s should have been replaced before now, but there's been lots of railroads that have had the opportunity to do that, right? And anyway, the rail needs upgraded, and some of the hardware that holds the rails together is very underrated for today's heavy rail cars. It's not brittle, but it's underrated, and so we're chasing a lot of band-aiding a lot of stuff rather than updating the rail. So, and then, you know, on the grant side, I know that's come up. There, you know, in recent years, there's been a fair number of federal grants as well as state grants. Federal grants tend to be much larger, but whether it's state or federal, they all require a great deal of match. And so from our perspective, if maybe the ideal thing would be to have $40 million, just flood the line, update it to, you know, 21st century standards, that would be great. But we can also do small things that slowly get it into a, call it 1990s format.
And you mentioned loan against it, so if it was your asset,
Mhm.
then it would allow you to be able to loan against that, to be able to do some of the upgrades. Can you do that? Would you do that with other rails? Like you own other rails, right?
Mhm.
And say, hey, I need $10 million for this rail, but you own 3 other rails.
Right.
And then you're going, okay, I can loan against those rails to dump money into this rail because it's part of your organization.
Right.
That'd be one, it allows you to do that you can't do currently.
Even just the value of the franchise, right? If we have a perpetual freight franchise for the freight that's here now or the freight that would be here 10 years from now, that's obviously more valuable than, oh, well, I get this piece of paper that has us there for the next 3 years or the next 10 years.
Okay.
So can I ask a follow-up question on this?
Absolutely.
I don't know that. While I haven't the experience specifically in railroad operation, there are lenders who lend based on the quality and value of your leasehold.
Mm.
So if you have a leasehold instead of 3 years, but for a 20-year leasehold or something like that, that can be used. We have wind turbines around, and wind turbines are put on land that generally isn't owned by the builder of the turbine. So they get their loan to build the turbine against the leasehold interest,
Mhm.
but those leases are for long term, so just.
Yeah, and I would follow up with it, that's the Lions Ferry model. You know, they have
Yeah,
a
that's
25-year lease
Yeah.
because that
Right.
operator, they borrow, the improvements they've made, like the cabins they put in and everything, they borrow, the leasehold interest is what they're borrowing, yeah.
So just informationally, I had another, just for my notes, I was trying to track. You said that you're operating about 250 miles of track of those. Can you break it down for me? How much of the 250 you own versus lease?
We own about 80, a little over 80 miles,
Okay,
about a third of it.
so 80 of the 250, and then I think you said, you've put back into service about 100 miles of track, and I think ours counts in that area. Where else have you done
Between Centralia and Yelm, Washington,
that?
between Othello and Royal City, Washington. And obviously here, essentially Prescott to Dayton.
Yeah, and the Centralia to Yelm and the Othello to Royal City, are those tracks that you own, or are they tracks that you lease?
Centralia to Yelm, we own.
That's the about 80 miles.
Yeah, it's part of the 80
Some of
miles.
it, okay. Alright. You mentioned something about, yeah, maybe, I was confused, so that's why I'm asking the question. You said if it were further down the road or something, if we were talking about a sale and then, that we could manage discontinuance or something like that. I wasn't clear if you were talking about like the idea of a clawback. You know what I mean when I say clawback?
Well, what I was maybe getting at, I'm not sure where you heard me, but situations like operation of the line can be covenanted, salvage can be covenanted,
Okay,
right?
okay, understood.
Do you mean through a sale? They're covenanted through sale documents?
Sure.
Is that where it would be
So-
covenanted?
I don't have any experience with that. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? What it would look like?
Well, I mean,
Conceptually?
essentially, the rail line could say, for instance, be sold without salvage rights. So
Oh, so
the
if you
franchise would be
stopped
sold, but we would not have the right to junk the track,
Okay,
so to speak. That would be one way, one model for that. Another model would be, okay, we do own the rail, but if we were to decide to dispose of the track, discontinue the service, so on, that the court would have a right to buy it back at favorable terms, similar terms, that kind of thing. There's different ways of handling this.
And those can be enforced?
I don't see why not. Sales provide for, however you organize the sale. I've seen these things done before.
can you give me an example? Not right now, but the paperwork that I'm interested in a deed that has that kind of reservation in it. I'm just curious about it
Sure.
because I'm having trouble.
Sure.
I've not experienced one, so if you
So-
could share that with me.
Well, one thing I would say is railroads can be sold as a layer cake. And it's like the idea of, well, I own this ground, but I don't own the mineral rights. Or I own the mineral rights, but I don't own the ground, right? There's different ways land can be sold. You can sell the air over top of the land and build a skyscraper over top of the rail yard. There's different ways this can be done. So there's the dirt, there's the freight franchise, there's the track. There's three right there.
Okay.
Well, those are some of the questions when people have concerns to say, okay, what if, okay, good intentions. You say, hey, we're gonna do this and we're on board already, buyer. How do we, one, protect you, right? Because you need to be protected because we're in the business of not hurting people and economic development. That's what we're trying to do here, right? But how do we protect our interest in this, in the future, right, of those things? So I think that legal aspect, getting that on board and saying, what is the law? What rights do we have? What options do we have if we go down this route? And that way we'll be able to tell the community, here's some options that are available to us if we go this route, so that they're not, people, if they don't know the information, they just create information. That's just how it is. So finding out that stuff is crucial on being able to say the pros and cons. Here's where we're at. So on the contract documents, what we can do. And I'm not here to say, because here's the deal. We say, I'll throw a number. We say, we're gonna sell it for $10 million and we get first row buybacks. Well, we have $10 million to buy it back, right?
Right.
10 years from now. It's like, where are we gonna come up with that? So then we get first buybacks, but we don't have it, so then it gets sold to whoever. So some of those protections, I'm not an attorney by any means, that's why we bring you the brains in, and those information, I think. That's some of what the community wants to hear on this, going forward from what I'm hearing. Just in limited conversations on that, so that's part of it, and part of this conversation, right? Is I would like to see, we have lots of documents, I got a 50-page document, and I got this documents and this documents. I would love to be able to create, once we answer some of these questions and start bulletizing, and I call it a one pager, but it's generally more than one pager. It can be one page, but a streamlined pros and cons, or this is what we got rolling, or this is the questions we've asked, here's the answers that we have. So that we're able to disseminate that when we can vet those to the public, those type of things, rather than having to say, well, it's on the site, you can read through all of the, right? The down and dirty of what it is, so that we can have legitimate cognitive thought conversations as this moves forward. I think that would be a great, that's kind of how I envision this conversation is, what do we want on that? And the conversations have been good with the city, with you, the legal side of it. So I think that's the direction in my view. So then we can kind of look at it and go, okay, cool, which will turn over rocks. And where rocks will get turned over, and we'll have more questions from those answers, but it'll give us the right information to make a solid decision on what we're doing here.
I have a number of questions for the operator, but I also thought maybe we were gonna discuss it amongst ourselves, and I'm kind of, why are we selling it? It's operating well. I know there's somebody that wants to buy it, but just because somebody wants to buy something doesn't mean we have to sell it.
No, you don't.
And so I'm not sure what drove, because I wasn't a part of it before, what drove this to even consider selling this transportation corridor, which involves Columbia and Walwall County that we own. And I'm not sure how we got here and why.
I tell you my why. I don't have a why to sell it. My why is, how do we make it alive, make it an asset that is worth an asset, whether we sell or don't sell. That's my vision of it. Now, I can argue and say, well, private sector, if they're vetted into it, and if I own something and I have ownership of that, the heart's gonna be in it to maintain it, keep it up, and make it thrive, because that's the bottom line, that's my bottom dollar, right? Government, I don't think there's good doing that. Because one, I look at it and say, okay, we own it, but we don't own any trains. We don't have any conductors. We're not in the rail business. We own the piece of land that's on it. And if we can, if the decision, and if we think it's best that, okay, we gotta start dumping the money into it, we have to get it to there, then that's the decision. So I don't have a why of why to sell it. My why is, what can we do to preserve it, enhance it for the longevity of the community? That's my why. If it has to be, if it comes down to, I think the best way to get there is to sell it, then that's where I'm gonna lean. If I think the best way to get there is to keep it in its current state, but do something different to get it to where it needs to be then that's what I'm looking at. So that's my why.
My why is, well, your question is, why would we consider it? Is because a community member, a business owner, and one of our tenants came to us asking us to. So because he asked us to consider it, I am considering it. The same as I do when any of our tenants or somebody wants to either lease or purchase property from us, whether it's a building down the street or the railroad, it's worth considering. Decision hasn't been made yet. The why would we sell? That's what we're coming to now.
Okay.
So we're gathering information so that we can make a decision.
Okay.
But the reason I considered it is because any offer that comes to us, I believe, is worth considering.
I have a number of questions for Paul, if I may. Paul, my big question is, you saw what the appraisal was. So, and I see your operator back there shaking his head no already. I have an issue if we sell it for less than that, because typically that's considered gift of public funds. So I'm just asking the question, are you prepared to pay the appraised value for it?
No.
Okay. So my next question, the rail getting access to Port Kelly, done a little research. From what I know, other Wadco especially, but other short lines are getting access onto UP and Burlington. But the biggest problem they're facing is the positive rail control, is what I was told. And in other areas, they're actually using either Burlington Northern or UP's equipment once it reaches their rail line so that that happens. Why are we still don't have access down to Port Kelly?
Well, so there's about 3 items there. The positive train control, where the major railroads have a scenario where they want a short line, such as you mentioned, Watco, or us, where they have a situation where they want the short line on their line. If it's more than just a couple miles, they'll insist that they have positive train control. And that's their right to insist upon it. There's a 2008 law that required them to have it. And so they're not going to let the junior railroads run about on their lines without kind of playing the same game. So, your comment about other short lines are getting out on the main lines, that's not necessarily a thing right now. I'd say in the last 20 years, that's really dried up. In fact, Mr. Piha here, he could, share that a couple of years ago, Union Pacific and Watco, they couldn't come to terms on the finances that would move wheat over the Union Pacific, the same Union Pacific line. And Union Pacific basically grabbed the business and crowded Watco out of that business. So there's not a dynamic right now where short lines are being invited in a big way out onto the Class 1 railroads. In terms of why we haven't, got access to Port Kelly, it's actually right there at Wallula Junction. There's a separate elevator. That's an ongoing thing, and we have our own strategy about that. I spoke to the Union Pacific about that matter yesterday, and it's not really on their radar. And we've had about 3 different strategies, and we're down to strategy 3 at this point. And we're in the middle of some valuable freight negotiations with Union Pacific involving the Wallula to Richland corridor. And that's necessarily ahead of the freight access to the barge terminal. And so we're going to get it done. I'm not speaking for Union Pacific here, but I believe we're going to get it done, but it hasn't been easy, obviously.
Sure. So in that same vein, I know they're taking organic grain cars onto their tracks from this area. Is that not true?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Organic wheat down onto UP's line.
Out of Prescott, we're interchanging.
Yeah, well, that's on our line.
Yes.
Prescott is still
Yes.
the port's line.
Yeah, we move wheat for Northwest. That is correct, but it's going at some distance. It's not going to export. And so grain growers all around Eastern Washington, the decisions on transportation are made over, pennies a bushel. And if you have enough bushels, even a fraction of a penny could, potentially drive a decision. So if the freight is going in the right direction and rail's a great advantage, then it's on the rail. But going into the export market, we are so close to the waterway that without a rail barge format, going all the way to Portland or Seattle hasn't proven economical by rail.
Frat grain. Frat.
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, we were approved, right?
Right.
How's that going?
Well, I think we have it all teed up. We have contractors on hand right now.
Yeah, if you go over to the siding there, Artisan, there's a $1 million camping machine that just showed up here in the last couple of days. And we got a tie crane that we picked up from the Port of Benton. We're borrowing from them. First tie car just arrived in Wallula, so it's all the stuff's coming together right now. We're hoping to start maybe 2-3 weeks.
Okay.
It'll start getting done. We've got a contractor lined up.
That was done through a state grant, is that right?
Well, we're about 20% of the money, and then within that 20%, I think the port has budgeted $20,000. So it's a little under 600,000 total. 80% of that's state, and then 20% of it's us and the port.
Yeah, 80% of the state grant money.
That is correct.
You talk about having, why didn't you ask for a long lease? I know Watco, from my research, had a 20-year lease before they left. Why did you only ask for a 3-year lease?
For flexibility, you know, both for the port's benefit and our benefit. Originally, that's my recollection anyhow. Make sure that it was working for everybody. The 20-year lease that Watco had, I think, was essentially the UP lease. Had UP, when the line washed out in 96, they essentially donated the line to the port. And I don't think that was UP's idea. I think it was probably the state of Washington, because they wanted to fund some emergency repairs. And at that time, the state of Washington didn't believe that they could spend money on privately owned infrastructure. So Union Pacific donated the line to the port, which sort of brought the port into Union Pacific's role under their existing lease with Watco. Does that sound right, Jim?
We inherited the lease with the donation, and it was a 20-year lease with a 20-year renewal.
Mhm.
So it was a 40-year lease.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember when you and I were talking about the lease, we were willing to do a longer lease, but you only wanted a 3-year lease.
Okay.
So I can see his question though, because you were talking about, long, getting a return on your investment, I think that's how Watco felt about that. They had a 40-year lease. So if they invested in the line, they knew they'd be benefiting from it long term. So.
So, one final question. The purchase of the line from the city of Tacoma, from what I found out, is you don't own the land. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
Okay, that's not what they're saying. They say you own the rail line, but they kept the rights to the land.
That's not correct. They retained some favorable future utility development provisions or rates. But we own the dirt. We pay taxes on it.
Okay. That's all my questions.
Okay.
Operator.
I had a follow-up question on something you said. You said that when the line was donated, state of Washington had the position, I think it was state of Washington, maybe it was federal, of not believing it could provide funding for improvements for privately owned.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still the attitude, or has that changed?
At the time, they didn't believe it comported with the state constitution, and I don't know when that changed. It was a few years later, they developed a FRAP program, and we apply for FRAPs, and that money flows into our privately owned infrastructure. Even the larger railroads have applied for those and at times received them. So I think it was maybe something that had never happened before. And so once it became kind of a priority, I mean, in 1980, there was virtually no short lines. And by the mid 90s, there was a lot of short lines. And I think the public decision makers were realizing, hey, these things need capital if we're going to retain them. And, there's been huge, state university studies that basically say it's cheaper for the state of Washington to help the short line railroads than the pace of pavement renewals if that short line goes away and all those trucks are now out on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was just kind of, it had never happened before, but at the time that was the way they wanted to deal with it. I think Union Pacific looked at the quality of the infrastructure, the amount of business, and they basically decided, okay, fine, we don't need that infrastructure in our holdings anymore.
So it has changed over the last.
Yeah, the state spends money on privately owned infrastructure at this time.
The story I was given by the former port manager was that the that UP didn't want to fix the line. So I don't know which is true. I don't know. It was so
Well,
long
I think
ago.
they can both
They
be.
didn't want, yeah, they didn't want to fix the line, and the state asked the Port of Walla Walla if they would take the donation, and they said no. So they asked Port of Columbia, and we said yes, because we still shipped asparagus. 1,000,000 cans a year at that time, so they felt like it was important to go ahead and accept the donation. But yeah, you're right, both things can be true, yeah, I don't know exactly. UP didn't want to fix the washout, I don't think.
Well,
in my
I don't
understanding,
remember,
yeah.
it might have been $1 million. There was a significant undermining of the bridge at Prescott, and there was some other problems, I think, up in
At
this
the
area.
state park, I think by the state park.
Yeah, that's right. And so the money, whether it was Union Pacific or Watco at the time, they looked at the amount of cars and they said, well, this doesn't cost pencil for us. And so I think that drove it into a public sector question.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
Why does the port want the rail line outside of the fact that it may be a valuable asset? Outside of that, I mean, it's
And I can only speak
it's a
for
problem,
myself.
right? I mean, it's a headache, right? Yeah, right?
Not particularly, no.
Okay.
No, the Paul's lease, he leases the line and the right of way.
Right.
So he has a right of way management company that takes care of the leases and other things along the right of way. We don't get much rent for it, but the whole point is for him to keep the revenue. So it is not a problem at this time, no, it's not.
So you asked me, the reason why I'm concerned about it is I want to see the future of Columbia County 50 years from now, being able to transport your products and the wheat and from, I'm worried about the dams coming out. I'm worried about the cost of road transportation. If you read even the state's transportation program or Northwest Grain Growers, there's 3 modes of transportation: rivers, rails, and roads. And the more you can have of those, the better the competition is for the cost for our grain to be shipped. So that's one of my reasons. If we sell it and Paul, God forbid, disappears or passes away, who's the next operator and what are they going to do? And can you build enough covenants in there, like Johnny said, okay, we have the right to buy it back, but we've spent the $10 million on other economic development. And now we don't have the $10 million. What are we gonna do then? If that's the period of time when other modes of transportation become not economical for our ag, we're big ag. Yeah, I mean,
So to Paul's point earlier, I think he said with 1980, there was hardly any short lines. So I ship product to about 9 or 10 different facilities across the Midwest in Michigan and New York. One of those is on the main line, UP, all the rest are on short lines. So UP was starting to pull out, and if the short lines hadn't have stepped in, we would have lost that service.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, the short lines are really good for us.
Yeah.
And those guys have a vested interest into keeping the short line open, and from Seneca Fruit standpoint, we really don't care who owns them, we just want to make sure there's somebody that has a vested interest in making sure it's operational at a reasonable cost, so that it's not overly expensive for us and they make some profit on it.
Yeah.
I don't think right now there's enough cars on there really to be really profitable, particularly if there's a lot of repairs that have to be made. But we just want to make sure that, like we said, 50 years from now,
it's still
there's a
there.
plan that's still happening.
That's
right.
I'm not against selling it per se, but what I'm against is not making sure it's viable into the future. And the minute you sell it, you lose some control. I mean, if I sell my house and I say I want mineral rights, it would be a problem to come dig under the person's house to get those mineral rights out. It happens, I know it does, but I would lose control of my home, though.
Yeah, and I was, same thing, I was sitting home trying to answer that same question. How do we make it viable for you? How are we protected? both like, not we, the port, but the community, because that's really who's, it's community,
Yeah.
we're the community, so. And I have a crystal ball and it didn't tell me, the future, and some of it, you gotta have some trust, and you gotta have some relationship to be able to say, this is what we're gonna do with whatever we can build into it protection wise legally, and that would fit both. Okay, cool. And I look at the other thing and say, okay, what if you weren't operating it? Then the port would own a railroad with nothing on it. Do you own from Walla Walla to, Fort Keller? Or is that-
We lease that. It's mostly Union Pacific. There's also sections that are BNSF.
Okay, so you lease that.
Yeah, there's two
loan there.
leases over there.
And you lease that.
Mhm.
So then if you're still leasing that, right, from Walla Walla to there,
Right.
and you weren't leasing this, who's gonna come in and lease from here to there?
Right.
And so I look at that and go, okay, yeah, we own these tracks and they're worth this, but if there's nothing moving on them and we're not maintaining them, that's a problem as well. So I look at that and go, I'm weighing that going, we're fortunate that we have an operator that is vested in it, that wants to do it, that can do it, financially, emotionally, whatever it takes to operate a railroad. To me, I'm super fortunate that we're there. But just as easy as we could sell it to anybody and they could say, okay, we're not gonna do it and we can't buy it back and we lose control, right? Just as easily, we could have nobody operating it and we still own it, and it's an asset that is sitting there. So that's the struggle that I weigh a little bit on some of those decisions, you know. Ultimately, how do we get it to where it's feasible for the use of it?
How long are your leases from Walla Walla down to the port?
So our BNSF lease is a 3-year revolving document.
Come up the same time as ours?
No, it rolls on its own dates. The Union Pacific, currently I think we're in year 1 of a 10-year, and I think there's a 10-year option on the other side of that.
Is there a, crystal ball again, so you're leasing that there, what if that got lost for a reason, but you owned this stretch here, and then how would that work?
So, to us, and we feel the same way for shippers, whether you're a short line or a shipper, anytime you can be at a point that has 2 big railroads that serve you with car supply and kind of line haul service, that's way better than being sort of subject to just one railroad. And so Walla Walla is a point that has both Union Pacific and BNSF infrastructure. That infrastructure happens to be leased to us right now. And then, so we take both railroads' business down to Wallula and hand off to them there at Wallula. So we'd still be interested in this if for whatever reason we were to lose those leases.
Because you could still tie that in, and it still would be working for you there.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Only if UP had somebody operating that section.
Well, again, it would be challenging for Union Pacific to fail to come to Walla Walla if they didn't have a short line. That's essentially why they hired us in 2019, as Watco had basically handed it back to them and said, there's not enough business up here. We won't want this one anymore. So we came in and said, we'll take it.
Right, so but you're saying you think what UP would run trains to Walla Walla?
If they had to, but I don't think they wanted to, which is why
Right.
they hired us.
Right, I understand
But
that.
they have an obligation to serve the business there. Their alternative to going where there's a call for cars and service is to petition the government to discontinue the line, but they don't do that so much anymore. They either operate it or short line.
Yeah, that's kind of worst case scenario, because I know their interest is to have you run it, especially if you were running it successfully, because it's in their interest for that.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
they wouldn't say, well, we're not gonna lease it to you, if they're making money and it's an interest to them and their operations.
I think most of these short lines, the major railroads established in the 80s, early 90s, maybe they've got a 10 or 20-year expiration on them, but usually they roll them over to the same party. But they also have, it's something they don't want, unless they sell it, they don't want to give it away for 100 years typically.
And some of the other questions that, concerns storage, right? I get it. There's places that we got trains stored out right behind my house. I kind of like it. As a matter of fact, if you could bring some other cars that you can't see through, so it blocks the noise, of the highway, that would be great. But I get it because that's part of how you stay in business. It is on those spurs to be able to park some of those things. But the intent is not to fill the damn thing up. The intent is use the spurs where you can to bring that revenue in so that you can maintain the tracks, you can operate them, you can do all these other things. So every little piece that comes in, especially when you have a rail, that is not everyday moving cars. Right? So it kind of helps with that. So I get it. And that is your intent, is not to fill it up. Because that's my understanding anyway. That's
Can you
what we're
imagine having 30 miles of rail cars stacked there and you need the one at the end?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I need that one. So, and the other, one that we'll talk about, the elephant in the room, at one of the meetings says, because I own property adjacent to the railroad, I shouldn't even be having these conversations. So, we'll probably relate to you and go, is that a real thing? I want to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. So, continue this process. I don't think it is. I'm not getting any kickbacks from the damn railroad because I live next to them. There are lots of people live next to them. I represent the community just like would anyone else. So anyways, well, that'll be part of this conversation legally, if you don't mind.
Well, I think we all have the same desires here, and that being a viable, long-term operating railroad that is going to be sustainable for many, many years to come and would help to alleviate any problems if the dams were breached. And so, having that's what all of our common interest is. We don't necessarily all agree on the best road, the best has to get there. So I guess we'll just continue with our information gathering and see what we can do, but
I'd like to
interested in
ask
hearing from,
the grain growers.
yeah.
Yeah,
Get into that. I'd like to go and hear from the grain growers and other stakeholders and see what they have to say and get some input and feedback from you guys as well.
So can we?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've always.
Will you say your name, please?
my name is
People
David-
online keep
David
asking.
McKinley. I'm here representing the Columbia County Association of Wheat Growers. I've always felt that having this railroad, this local railroad, was kind of like an insurance policy for us farmers in case the Snake River dams were ever breached, or if there was just some kind of a catastrophic mechanical failure. I know that the tracks are not up to speed, up to handling, that kind of traffic right now. But if the port owns the line, it maintains ownership of the line, they could invest money. I think they could seek grant money to repair and improve the line so that if that should ever happen, we could shift gears and go rail, even if maybe it would be forever or maybe just short term. But if we sell the rail to Paul, and Paul, I have nothing but respect for you. I think you're a good businessman, a good, honest person, but we lose control over that. I mean, that's the biggest thing to me. We don't know what your intentions will be. Things happen, things change. If we own the county, the port owns the railroad, we maintain control, and it's like we get the best of both worlds. We maintain control. We hope we can have you operate, and if you can't do it, if you have to leave, maybe we'll have to find somebody else to operate it. But I think maintaining ownership is really important.
Yep.
So Chris Piha, Northwest Grain Growers. I'd probably, Seneca and ourselves is probably the biggest stakeholders involved. Can't speak for Seneca here, but just a couple thoughts that I have. I'm a little surprised. Obviously, we work with Paul on moving cars and stuff. I'm a little surprised that he hasn't approached us about the idea that he wants to buy the line. I had to hear that from Jenny, which I would have thought as a stakeholder, he would have come and talked to us about it. So it just makes me wonder a little bit about what the intention is if you're not informing your stakeholders of what you want to do. So again, not good or bad. I think any of you guys that had a vested interest in the line would want to have the same question of why are they not trying to build support from the stakeholder side of if it's a good deal for the stakeholders, why would you not be trying to get stakeholder buy-in before coming to a meeting to talk about selling the line? So just some confusion on my part there. Just a couple of comments. Congratulations on your FRAP money that you talked about getting down there. That's great. It's been my experience, if you guys know anything about the grain growers, we operate on another short line owned by the state of Washington. So we've spent a lot of time the last 6 or 7 years. We invested a lot of private money into an asset on a short line that was owned by the state. And it's been my experience when it comes to whether it's the FRAP grants or just lobbying in Olympia. So we've been pretty successful. We were able to get the legislature to allocate $150 million for those 3 state-owned lines. And then we've been able to leverage that into about $100 million of federal CRISI grant money. My experience in those is it's generally been better to have public partners in those application processes. Typically, when you see, they like public-private partnerships is what they really like when they review those grants. So I'm just thinking about your guys' FRAP grant that you got, the ability that the port put money in and the private operator put money in looks very favorable on those applications. And essentially that's the same way we went about getting the $150 million in the transportation funding, in addition to the $100+ million we've gotten federal CRISI grant money, was the fact that it was private contributions and public contributions to go after that, especially on that federal money side. So I'd be really concerned if you gave up ownership of the line. What's the port's vested interest in going together to put a grant together to try to get additional money for that line? So right now you guys kind of have the best of both worlds working together to try to leverage money, whether that's state or federally. So just again, that's my experience. I'm not saying it's not possible to get just private money, but generally it's looked upon better. And some of the grants you can't apply for unless it, like as a private business, we can't actually go apply for the money. We have to either get the city or the county or the port or someone to actually apply for the grant for us, because as a private business, we can't actually apply for some of those grants. So just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about trying to leverage money for getting those grants. And then I just touch on, I think Mike maybe mentioned it, but I really think as a commission, you're not making a 10-year decision, or nobody knows what's going to happen as we go in the future. And I'm sure 60 years ago when they built the dams, nobody was thinking about that was something that we were going to remove. And you're not making a decision for you or this generation. We're talking about generations that probably aren't sitting in the room yet. And what does it mean? I'm just thinking about I moved to Walla Walla 25 years ago, and it was around that time that they started talking about the Highway 12 expansion to Burbank into 4 lanes. If they get the rest of the money to complete phase 8, that's going to turn into an over $1 billion project to just create 2 extra lanes from Walla Walla to Burbank. The fact that you currently have a right of way from Dayton to Walla Walla, whatever your appraisal says, it's not enough. It's not enough money to have a continuous right of way for that whole corridor, whether that's for a future utility corridor, whether that's for even if the rail line went out of disrepair, but they removed the dams, the value of that property continuous right away is undervalued no matter what I haven't seen the appraisal. I can't tell you what the number is to even tell you it's undervalued. I just know when you start talking $1 billion to acquire the land and to put in 2 extra lanes of highway between Walla Walla, 30 miles of highway, it's undervalued, whatever the number they've told you it is. Not thinking about what the value is today, but what the potential value of that's going to be in the future. So to kind of piggyback on David's comments is worried about what the future generation and who has control. And I don't disagree that there's things that you can't write into the sale of the property, but you don't have, right now you have control whether there's an operator or not an operator. Once he owns it, you have no control over whether the rail line could exist, but that doesn't mean there's an operator. And all of our dealings with Paul have been great. I have nothing against Paul, but I have no idea what his succession plan is, nor what he intends to do with that. Again, and whether that's in 10 years or 50 years, that's where I would be concerned about where you're leaving that, whose hands you're leaving that control in, and whether, even if you could claw it back, whether you can afford it. Those are all questions you can't answer today, but you can always answer, if I own the line, I can find somebody to operate it. Now, it may not be at rates that you like, but there's a value that you can get an operator for. You can't determine whether you can claw it back, whether you can afford to do those things. Those are all questions outside. And what I would really rely on right now is Jenny's comments of how big a hassle or what is it costing us to own the line? That's what I would go back to. I don't think you're ever going to be able to afford to recreate a contiguous right away from here to Walla Walla to hit a main line. And it doesn't have to go to Walla Walla. You can hit the main line, say outside of Burbank. It really is no different of how do you rebuild that resource, if you will. And what I'm going to tell you is you're never rebuilding it. Once you give it up, it's gone. It's not a replaceable asset. So that's my 2 cents.
What would be handy for me, Jenny, is if we could come up with a 1-pager or a 2-pager.
Okay.
I just call it a 1-pager. It's just make 3 bullet points. Well, some of the things that I would like to see on there.
Okay.
Just a brief current use. Future use intention. Paul on his future use, what he's gonna do with, just kind of a little verb, some history. How we got it. What, not a book, but just
Okay, yep.
kind of how we got
Summary.
it. This is what it is,
Okay.
those type of things. A grant history. So grant history, successful grant history since we've been operating it.
Okay.
What grants were approved, where it went, and then maybe even grants that were applied for that were unsuccessful, if there was any. Port role in the rail. We kind of have an idea of what that is, but maybe other rails purchased recently. It doesn't have to be, those are some of my notes.
Purchased by Paul or by anybody?
Paul probably did more of like history, kind of like what he explained today. We have these, we purchased this from the city of Tacoma. This is kind of what it was, a little bit, just some information on what that is. And then the legal stuff, right? Can we sell it? Do we have to have it open bid? Can we put contingency plans on? All of those things, maybe some research on those.
Okay.
And not necessarily this in depth, but yeah, we can go this route, or this has been done historically, or there's a statute for this, those type of things, for that. The other probably elephant in the room is, what do you think it's worth, Paul?
I mean, I don't know, is that a theoretical, or you want me to answer that now?
Well, it'd be nice to know.
I didn't mean to interrupt your thought.
No.
In other words.
Is what you're capable, what you're willing, what a ballpark without,
Suggestion, that could be in the 1-pager.
yeah.
instead of you having to.
Exactly. So think about that. If there's an idea, or maybe we'll have some conversation, but thought process of what is the value of, because if it's not even close to where we need to be, some of these other conversations, that deal. So
I kind of wanted to follow up on that is if the decision is not to sell it, Paul, would you still be interested in a long-term lease?
The line soaks up a lot of attention in terms of maintenance and administration. And I mean, we've raised that in several, our communication with the port about wanting to buy the line goes back to 2022. And I probably need to apologize for Chris for not having him better cut in on our agenda here, but we've said that it's kind of an administrative from our perspective, maybe not from the port staff, but from our perspective, administratively, it brings me to meetings at 6 p.m, right? And we have easier to manage railroad that's more prosperous. And so we want to put this into kind of our normal pattern. And I think relative to all the to-dos that the line needs, I think long-term now, we're not super interested in leasing it long-term. Now owning it would be super attractive. Then we're not worried about the investment needed. We know whether it's the existing wheat and seed business that we haul and potential to haul other things, such as fertilizer. That existing business plus the future business, which I believe this line will ultimately be handling more wheat with or without a change to the waterway. I think it will be handling more wheat. The railroads are simply more efficient than they were even in the 90s with moving wheat across the state. So one way or another, I think it's going to be busier, but meantime, it's going to need 10 years of bootstrap investment, sort of like we've been doing, but we want it in a different format.
So,
Paul, I'm sorry, Jenny.
go ahead.
You talked about, if they sell it and they can have contingencies and whatever. Aren't there ways to streamline your lease so that maybe it isn't as burdensome for you to get approvals and do other things that you can do a 25-year lease? You can solve a lot of your problems that you're talking about.
Yeah, we could take back the right-of-way management. We just gave it to you so you could earn the revenue.
But I'm not just even talking about that. I'm just saying a lot of the concerns that you have laid out, there's also ways to deal with that with just in your long-term lease that, worried about investment and recapitalizing those things. And you could do that you could have a lease through a long enough period of time that it would actually be simpler, not as attractive financially for you because you don't own the line, but there would be ways to write your lease that you could solve a lot of the problems that you're trying to say, I can't do this because I don't own the line.
Sure.
But if you actually had a long-term lease, you could solve those problems without the port having to give up control of the line.
Right.
It seems like maybe there's an easier path to get there than what this may take in order to overcome buying the line. That's my 2 cents, but there's usually more than one way to do these things. And just by some of the comments I've heard, I think you have some problems, especially if you want to buy the line at lower than appraised value. You have some major conflict hurdles that the port would have to jump through, which again, I'm not a lawyer and I don't know how these things work, but I would be very nervous as a commissioner and I sold the line for less than appraised value.
Yeah.
And especially if I didn't go to bid.
So if it's appropriate for me to share at this time, the first transaction we bought from the city of Tacoma was 35 miles, and that included an extra 175 acres of non-rail land that was attached to the railroad with buildings on it. And that appraised for, around 7 million, and it went out to public auction and we were the sole bidder at 2.8.
It was on an auction.
Yeah. Sole bidder at 2.8 on appraisal of stone. The most recent piece of railroad, and that had no freight, dead railroad. Most recent purchase from City of Tacoma was directly negotiated with the city because what they were selling was tributary to the first thing they sold. And so we were the obvious natural buyer. It wouldn't make economic sense for future development to put a new buyer out there tributary to us. That appraised for, I think, around 6 million, and we bought that for 2. And the strategy of the city was, yes, we have a public utilities department railroad company that has been contracted with the city to operate this for 20 years. But our costs, the future needs of the line, it's basically upside down. We want to put it back out in the private sector, which doesn't necessarily have to operate. It's not a pure counterpart to this situation, but they basically said, we need to put this out to the private sector that's more nimble and go find the freight and manage this thing and put the capital into it. And so it was basically on the part of the seller, cultivate the future strategy. In other words, put it into the private sector at the right price where they could justify putting in the capital, which we're doing right now. And that piece of railroad that was appraised at 6, we bought for 2. It had, 1,500 cars a year of freight on it. So there's some valuable business, and we've about doubled that already. So I think if this railroad were publicly auctioned with a requirement or a legal requirement that service be retained and the line not be junked, I don't think you'd get a $1 million bid from the market. And I'm being dead serious. I don't think that auction would draw $1 million bid. If it required you to continue to operate it and not be able to salvage it. So I'm saying the market is very different. And the other thing I would say is that, the state of Washington owned grain railroad is a unique situation. Maybe there's an argument that the Port of Columbia line should be thrown into the PCC system so that the state can shower it with money too. Because I will tell you, even though the state has the FRAP program, they sprinkle, $10 million every other year across all the other short lines. And then they put their staff resources in concert with private industry, the users of the rail lines, and they come up with 175 million for the stuff that's their footprint. So outside of the PCC system, the trend in the rest of the country, all these city, port, county-owned short lines all across North America over the last 10 years have been privatizing because the short lines are on their game. They know what they're doing and they want the simplicity. And I always ask, what's the why? To my sense, there's not really a good why for the port to retain this. If they have a serious quality operator that wants to integrate it into a system. And the big advantage to me, besides financial, is stability and how we basically how the Union Pacific treats us. If we're the owner and we've got the relationship we do with the Union Pacific, that does good things for us. And for the community, our ability to move freight ultimately into the river system.
What if, so there's I know we're getting into our hours, but, so there's a considerable investment in maintenance, right? Maintaining the track.
Right.
Right? And we own it. It's ours. If there was an aggressive approach from the port to actually own that, meaning own the maintenance, own the,
Right.
Go get the dollars. And for the port to manage that part of it, to limit the amount of a private carrier having to dump their money into something they do not own. I would have a hard time dumping something that I didn't own.
Right.
So I understand that. So, if we had an aggressive approach and kind of changed how we might be doing business and said, you know what, we're gonna do this, we're gonna get it up to where we need it to be able to have the business that you want. Is that something you would be interested in as well?
Well,
So
Yeah.
so it wasn't coming out of your pocket, so you weren't worried about necessary return on investment and all those things.
so the one side of the coin is. Okay, so now we're a trucking company, right? The DOT manages the snow plows and the culverts and the signs and all this sort of thing, right? If we're just the railroad company that runs across your line and you guys have the track crews and all the admin to the line. So that's the one side of the coin. That looks favorable. The other side of the coin is now the maintenance being managed by the government. It's gonna be a lot more expensive than when we were doing it. They gotta figure out all the ins and outs of that scene. And again, where's the money? You know, and it usually comes back to the users. So now we gotta charge the users a toll for using the toll roads essentially.
And I was thinking more in the line of the money, not us managing, we're not in the real business, but going to get the money to say, hey, we've got this pool of money. Here you go. You guys know the business.
Right.
Here's the money.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Is that something you want added to the 1 or 2 page list of information you want? That
Yeah, what-
question, that
Yeah, kind of
generalized question?
what the approach would be, something's
Yeah.
done, right?
From all, I mean, you want the information,
Yeah.
the way I guess I articulated the question when I was writing it down for myself was, what has been done, what could be done, what are the different options, either way, whether it was privately owned or publicly, a private-public partnership, but that's really, you want to see the full picture.
Yeah.
The whole spectrum of what could be done.
You are spot on.
And when you say could be done, do you mean how it could be managed or what do you mean?
I guess I heard money, I heard.
It's more money.
not
We're
so
not
much-
we're not in the real business. I mean, we own the land. We could be, I guess.
So-
But
Like, were you thinking about, grant funding or?
I guess the question would be, is when we get the answers of over the course of what we've had, what we've applied for, what we've gotten, what we've historically put into it. And if it's not enough, because it's not enough, apparently, because we still have some dilapidation going on. So what would it take to get it up to there? And what our role would be? Is there more that we can do to get it there? For any owner?
So one thing I would ask along those lines, because, Mr. Dillis, you have a lot of experience along this line. And you have both the experience of being the owner of the land and the tract and the experience of being the tenant. Where's it working well? What's working well, where, that kind of thing. So that can be part of the information gathering.
Yeah, that would be.
That's my things.
So there's also a hybrid lease where you lease or own the tracks and the rails and we keep the corridor. And you, unless you go out of business, we just maintain the corridor, not the tracks, not the ties, not the bridges. And that way, God forbid, something happens to your company.
Right.
Then that corridor is maintained forever. But you are the owner of the tracks and the rails. And you make the money on the freight and the storage of cars, which you do already, right? I don't know what we're charging for lease.
We charge him $4,000 a year. It's nothing because we want him to be successful and he gets to keep the lease revenue from the right of way.
So that's what I'm talking about on the legal side, is what options are there, you know, I'm not saying we'll take any of them.
You want the information.
Yeah, yeah.
I like what Mike just said. I would like to see Mr. DeDelius get what he wants. Improvements on the railroad, increase volume, make more money off of it. We, as farmers and taxpayers in Columbia County, would like to have control in the future. And I think there's gotta be a way that we can both get what we want out of this. And you know, this is a good start, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. This is worth the conversation, if you're up for those conversations.
Well, sure, I mean, like I say, there's different ways to,
And ways to skin a cat.
yeah.
But I appreciate you guys being here, I appreciate the back row, appreciate the conversation. It's not, it doesn't get wicked and ugly and all that stuff. It's a conversation. And there's some great information and great questions in it. And if we can start both nights and make it a,
I have a gigantic list, so
Yeah.
I do need to say it's gonna take some time to put this together.
yeah, so, when's our next meeting?
Well, our next Port
Wait,
Commission
Wednesday?
meeting is next Wednesday, the 12th. Yeah, it's not gonna be ready by then.
Yeah. Do we want to have a,
Yes.
another workshop meeting?
Well, I don't know if we need
Or
another
just another-
workshop, but what we need to do is we need to give her time to get this report put together for us, and we need to schedule basically the public meeting where we can come in here, public comment, we can present this information that she has worked out for us, we can present that to the public. It can also be, a document that's attached to the agenda for the meeting. But I think the next step, unless Kim has other advice for us, would be to work on scheduling our public hearing about it, so we can hear from the members of the public. It won't be a decision-making meeting, it'll just be a chance for us to meet in a larger venue and hear the voices of the community.
I'd like to get this solidified
Mhm.
and vetted and make sure we have accurate information before we go to a public hearing.
Yes, for
So
sure.
that we are not shooting from the hip and, here's the options, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, before we go into that. So
100%.
I think we need to solidify that, view it as commissioners. Yep, that's on pass. That's what we're looking for. If we need to add more things in there and then schedule a meeting for the public meeting about. And maybe even another venue, if we get to that point and say, here's what we know. What we don't know.
My recommendation would be that you give Kim and I some time to go through this and see what.
Right.
Yep.
How much time it's gonna take to put it together before you schedule a public meeting. Do you agree, Kim?
Oh, definitely.
I'm
I
not
was
wanting to
thinking,
schedule meeting tonight.
Okay, okay.
I was thinking at a meeting, at a regularly scheduled meeting, maybe we could have the list of the topics that should be covered.
Mhm.
That way, if we've missed something and trying to go
Yeah,
through
that's what I was
lists and everything,
Mhm.
that can be refocused or added to it.
Right.
So that we don't fully flesh out a list that we haven't gotten your review of ahead of time.
So not next week, but the next meeting.
Well,
So that would be March.
March, in March.
Think you'll be able to have at least a.
Oh, yeah, we can do that, and yes,
So that'd be.
list of topics to be covered at
And then-
March meeting.
And once we.
At the March meeting, we've seen that, then we can
Say yes, go ahead and,
fine tune it, revise it as we suggest, and we can go at that time and schedule our
yeah,
public meeting.
And it gives all the community, the folks here, folks online, folks talking about it, whatever, give them an opportunity to kind of ask their questions too, and we'll have some of that information and I'll go from there as well, so.
So what about the Walla? I mean, most of our line is actually in Walla County. Do we want to hear from the users of the railroad? in
I mean,
Walla County?
Stakeholder, maybe, but as far as, we are the Port of Columbia,
Right.
Right.
It's our asset and
so Columbia County is what I'm worried about, for the most part, on this commission.
But it affects the health of, I don't know how much grain is being shipped out of Prescott.
Well, like I said, stakeholders are absolutely,
Oh,
but just the general, hey, throw it out to Walla County, see what they think.
no, I'm not, I'm talking about specific
Yeah.
users of our line.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think we've pretty well exhausted our resources this evening. We've gathered a lot of information. I really appreciate everybody for coming. Thank you for talking, for sharing your concerns, your thoughts. It's all valuable information. This is not a decision that any of us want to take lightly, and whichever way we want to do, we want to do it. We want to do it properly. I don't know if there's anybody here in this room that's ever bought or sold a railroad except for maybe one person. So
I bought one, but it went around the Christmas tree. That's it.
So, appreciate everybody's patience as we navigate this situation, and with that, I think we will go ahead and close this meeting up. Jenny, you're comfortable with what we're asking you and Kim to come up
I
with?
think
for us?
so. Kim and I will compare notes and make sure we've got a list that you guys agree with.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
You coming?
Let's start